Hey everybody, welcome back to the Cinephile. This week we're talking about Some Like It Hot, a 1959 romantic comedy. Jake, did you like Some Like It Hot?
I did. This week, you got to pick Return to Me last week, so this week was my pick. And shocking for anyone that knows me, I'm a classics nerd. So of course, we went way back in time to 1959 uh, to Some Like It Hot, the Billy Wilder classic. It's fun. It's crazy. It's takes a
It's
very off the wall, lighthearted screwball look at romance in a way that is
it's
not
wild.
realistic at all, but it's fun, and I like it a lot.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this a little bit more than I think I was going to. One of my cousins always says that he never watches movies before 1977, which is obviously when the original Star Wars came out. Shout out
One
to
of your
Mark if you're watching
cousins
this.
is lame.
Oh well, I'm not going to say that. He's really quite cool, but uh the point is
Sorry,
that
Mark.
a lot of times a lot of times when you see older movies, especially like black and white films, I think a lot of modern audiences kind of discount them
Yeah,
as old. The humor doesn't work, it doesn't look right, it's too slow. There's so many different issues that people have with older films. And while, yes, at times films can feel old, sound old, look old, I think this one, honestly, even though the premise is a little wacky, I think the humor
just a little bit.
really holds. Yeah, I think the humor really holds up here.
Yeah.
And I was surprised about how much I laughed, considering that, I mean, this was made in the late 50s. The setting, it takes place what, in the
In the
early 30s?
30s, yeah, during Prohibition. The first scene is just like wild because you think it's like some car chase with a hearse, and then come to find out it's full of booze.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I texted you when I was watching this. The first scene, I was like, "This is gonna be a trip." I was like, a couple of good old boys in the back of a hearse getting chased by the police, and then I see that the hearse starts, or that the um coffin starts leaking, and I'm like, "What is in the coffin?" And it turns out it's a bunch of booze. And then they go to mozzarella's.
yeah,
Um, I'm like,
a little
it,
stereotypical there,
yeah,
maybe.
this legit is kind of like there are a lot of
Oh
stereotypes in
yeah,
this movie.
100%. I mean, like we said, it's 1959, like, and it's supposed to. I think they try to make it feel a little older than maybe it was. Like if you look at, say, it's like its contemporaries, other things in 1959. I think it feels a little older than maybe some of the
Mhm.
rest. I can't think of anything from 1959 at the moment. Um, but I think the fact that it's set, early 30s prohibition, like that, perhaps maybe like they really leaned into that setting and made it, it reminds me of like a late 30s, early 40s, like Howard Hawks screwball comedy in a lot of
Mm.
ways.
Yeah, and this definitely is a screwball comedy.
Yeah.
The wacky setting, the premise, and a little bit later we'll go into the five key differences between a romantic comedy and a screwball comedy. Obviously, this has romance in it. This is Romance Month. This is the
Mm-hmm.
final week. But it really, this film kind of is so cleverly written too.
It's very
Um,
sharp. The
it's very sharp.
dialogue is very sharp and pointed, and it's very fast.
Yes,
Like,
and I think that that works to its advantage, especially since these
yeah,
two main characters are essentially winging it as women.
yeah,
For most of the movie, they don't exactly know what they're doing, but it really, I think that helps encapsulate their characters. But even at the beginning, when he's like, greased lightning, this dog that put it's 10 to 1 odds. Put all the
yeah.
money on that, and then, oh no, I've got another one. That's gonna work. It's kind of uh they're living life in the fast lane
Yeah,
for sure.
loose and fast to be sure.
Yeah, and so it's just such an this is a movie that I mean, I guess the closest comparison for modern day would be White Chicks, just in the
Okay.
premise itself.
Yeah.
Um, but even that is not
It's
really,
a bit of a stretch.
it's a bit of a
Like
stretch. I
I
mean,
see where you're going, but I don't know if it's hard to think of something contemporary to compare it to because I feel like it's something that maybe only worked in 1959, you know?
I agree. I agree. I mean, do you
In a
think this
weird
movie
way
could be
about
made
it.
today?
I I think it could. I think it's not likely to get made today, if that makes
I agree.
sense. You know, it's has a different sensibility, shall we say, than what seems a lot of studios are going for
Yeah.
in modern cinema, which is fine. Like,
Yeah, there's no issue. I mean, this was like we
yeah,
said, 1959. I mean, we should put a counter on the screen of it. How many times we say 1959 in this movie, in this podcast?
that
Because,
was going to turn a drinking game into it.
but yeah, this is a movie that I think in its current form, one, I mean, kind of the overall premise. Take the fact that they dress up as women and pretend to be women. I mean, this overall trying to live two different
Yeah.
lives kind of portion with Joe. I think that is something that we see all the time of trying to balance two different
Hmm.
lives essentially. That's something like there are different pieces that I think
Yeah.
we see all the time, but all of it combined, um I don't know if it could be, it definitely can't be made the way it was made in 1959.
And like I think part of it is like the setting, right? You know, the not only, you know, it, set during Prohibition and the whole kind of compelling, shall we say, um, compelling threat. You know, kind of what our inciting incident is running away from these gangsters, right?
Right.
But doing it in like this very comical and like harebrained and off the cuff way. Um, you don't see too many gangster comedies nowadays, right? Whereas I
No.
feel like, you know, from really the inception of sound, I really think you could say through, you know, the 60s, really until we get to The Godfather, like mob movies were, you know, they were seeing, you know, you had mob dramas, but then you also had like the comical version of the mob, right?
Yeah.
That I don't
Yeah.
think I think kind of you get into The Godfather and people's concept of the mob changes a little bit.
Well, that
Um,
actually, and I hate to get on a tangent on The Godfather, which is a movie I'm sure at one point we will cover. But
we might do all of them sometime.
they
We need
they
a series.
I mean we do. It's some of the greatest films of all time. But mobsters kind of started walking a little taller after that movie came out. Obviously, there were big issues with the production of that film. Being able for it to even be made was a stretch. But it's like they kind of felt like they could be respected a little bit more,
Yeah.
walking a little bit taller, feeling just a little bit better about themselves. And because, I mean, you have a lot of mobster movies in the 30s, James Cagney, and all of those, yeah, they're serious moments, but the tone is different.
Mm-hmm. Much
It's
different.
significantly different. And so this kind of falls into that pre-Godfather tone,
Mm-hmm.
where, yeah, I mean, they're killing people, but it's kind of a caricature almost of what a mobster actually does.
Right.
Um, but yeah, we got mobsters in this. We got like at one point a bit of a love triangle,
Yeah.
but between three ladies. And I mean, we got like the old buffoon
Yeah.
in there as well, who's in love with who he thinks is a woman.
Good old Osgood. He
And
honestly,
Osgood,
I as strange as Osgood is, like I love that character. Like for
yeah,
me, like that pays off the whole, like really the whole second half of the movie. Just like pays off for me because of
And like,
Osgood.
one, how is his mother still alive?
I know.
He's
Didn't.
like, oh, mother doesn't like that my former wife, smoked cigarettes with her toes, but like this, oh my Lord.
Yeah, it
He
didn't dawn
this
on me how old Osgood's supposed to be until this rewatch. I'm like, oh, he's supposed to be like. I took him to be like in his like late 50s, early 60s.
No, I mean they like even when you got to what essentially was a retirement community,
Yeah, in
and
Florida,
in Florida, and all these guys,
and they all said it
and
Florida,
Florida, and then Sugar
Florida.
goes, I hope their grandsons are here.
Yeah,
I that character, and he kind of finishes the movie being like, you know what? I don't even care that you're a man.
yeah.
It can work.
It's one of the greatest endings of
And
in
you
cinema history. Full stop.
and oh, I agree. It's like the two I guess issues, if you will, the fact that both these characters are men, that issue with Sugar being that she kind of fell in love with a different version of the guy, and so that's kind of
Yeah,
sketch. And then the issue with Osgood being that he thinks that Daphne is an actual woman, and so he's like, okay, like let's get married. And then by the end, both those characters just don't care. They're like, you know what? I'm here for it. And that that was just really weird. But I think it's also interesting. You mentioned that this is a rewatch. I
mm-hmm.
had never seen this movie before. Obviously, it's really quite famous. But it was neat to watch it for the first time, and kind of going back to what we said at the beginning, being able to sit down and watch these older films, um, like they still hold up. They
Oh
still
yeah,
hold up. Now, I will say Marilyn Monroe lip syncing, um,
yeah.
that was kind of an L. Uh,
Marilyn and Monroe, like this whole production. Um, I knew she was kind of famous for being, like the original diva, if you will,
mhm.
um, and making shooting hard. But doing a little bit of research on this, like she would be like 2 hours late to set, right? Which is
Interesting. Okay.
insane. Like just show up like an hour or two late, and like they couldn't do anything. Like when you shoot a movie, like you've got your call sheet for the day, and like it's a very tight and regimented schedule. So if someone just is not showing up, like that throws a whole wrench in the day. And then
Yeah,
she could never remember anything. I mean, people had to wear whiteboards with lines written on them. She had wrote lines on her hand, I think, for some scenes, stories go. And even still, they would have to shoot it 30 times.
that's I and so at this point, right? I mean, this was shot probably in 1958, early
Yeah,
1959 to
57,
yeah.
58. Yeah.
And so at this point, I mean, she was top shelf. And I think she also at that point probably was doing drugs.
Yeah.
And
Marilyn
so
Monroe is just such it, it it's such an she's such an interesting subject of the golden age of Hollywood, right? She's her story is just so um mythicized in a lot of ways. We
oh, for
saw
sure.
um Blonde, the movie that came out this past year with Ana de Armas,
I couldn't
about
get through that.
Marilyn Monroe, and it Ana de Armas is nominated for an Oscar, if I'm not mistaken, right, for Best
Yeah. Mhm.
Actress,
Yeah.
which makes you think it's a good performance. But like, I didn't see Blonde because I read so much about how it's about Marilyn Monroe the myth rather than what we know now about who Marilyn Monroe was. Right? She
I
was
agree with
led a
that. From what I saw, it was definitely mythicized.
yeah,
Not
and
only in the story, but like even in the production design. Like literally, like I mean, it's kind of like a fever dream.
yeah,
Um,
and it's just like her story has been mistold and rewritten so many times throughout history, and like I think that's why, she did ended up, taking her life and coming to an early death.
I
Because,
don't think she took her own life, but yeah.
well, that's
Conspiracy corner with Ben.
we could spend an hour talking about that.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
she was whacked. Anyway,
what the point I'm trying to make is, yes, it's easy to be like, how unprofessional, like to have to do it 30 times and showing up 2 hours late. But like, that was when her life was having to constantly be who everyone else expected her to be as Marilyn
right.
Monroe, the sex symbol. Like, she was like the biggest female star for like 15 years, right?
Yeah,
She
yeah,
was it really wasn't because she was that good of an actress. It was because of her looks, her persona, and her status, as the biggest sex symbol in the world. And so having to live up to that every day, and that's got to be hard. And I think you see that take a toll on her. And so that's probably why she is so depressed that she's 2 hours late to shoot, and doesn't want to go to work and all this stuff. Um,
yeah. And I think honestly, like you mentioned Marilyn Monroe, and I think her performance in this, I really enjoyed it.
yeah, it's
I can
it's
see,
actually pretty good.
yeah, I can see
Of
why she was so popular.
Yeah,
Um, but I think, yeah, I think you're right. When you are expected to be someone other than yourself, and that's
yeah,
how you essentially have set up your life.
mm-hmm.
Um, Not saying that this was all on her, but
Yeah,
like how she lives her life is as the sex symbol. Um, that definitely can take a toll
yeah, for sure.
on it. I like what you said um, about kind of this the onset issues with Marilyn Monroe. Do
Mhm.
you have any other fun facts about
Um,
this movie that we should know
the
about?
the funniest fact to me, at least, is it was banned at the release. It was banned in the state of Kansas for being too not racy, because there's nothing sexy about this movie, right? There's nothing, you know, there's no nudity or sex or anything like this.
Right.
But the fact of two men dressing as women in the late 50s is, humorous to some and scandalous to others. And so, no, it was banned in the state of Kansas when they made
Interesting.
this.
And that's
Um,
so weird. That is really weird because even though yeah, these guys are cross-dressing, the way in which the story's told, I don't know. It just like
there's
it's so
nothing to suggest.
logical.
There's nothing to suggest they enjoy this. They're doing it for their survival,
Yeah.
right?
And it's like I don't know, for me at least, it just seemed like the logical
Yeah,
thing, so it didn't really I didn't really bat
yeah,
an eye at it at all.
yeah. And I guess the Kansans in the late 50s, early 60s, they thought, well, they should have just stood up like men and took in their lumps with the mob instead of dressing like women to escape. But you can't please everyone.
No, you can't.
As Osgood says to end the movie, nobody's perfect.
Right. Man, that dude. That dude
Hilarious.
is a clown, man. Yeah, so that's super interesting. I wanted to kind of touch on we talked before about how this is a screwball comedy.
Yeah.
And in the book, I referenced it last week. Or yeah, I referenced it last week when we talked about Return to Me. But it's written by Dr. Wes, who teaches at Ball State, and Jake and I both had him. And so he highlights 5 key differences between the comedy genres of screwball comedy and romantic comedy. So I wanted to go through those today because I think it's really interesting. And like we said, each one of these movies that we've seen this month all have to do with romance, but they're all very different.
Yeah.
So to kind of talk about screwball comedy, I think is important here. So there are 5 key differences. I'm reading this directly between the two comedy genres. First, the screwball variety places its emphasis on funny, while more traditional romantic comedy accents love. I think that is definitely highlighted in this
Oh,
movie.
so much so. I mean, the 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 romance that results in this movie is played for laughs, right? It comes about as like furthering a joke. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Hmm.
it's really not genuine. No one, I think, genuinely falls in love here. I think it, it's more played off as a joke.
Yeah, and it's a joke that honestly, I mean, it worked. This movie was not about love at all. Like,
No.
it's like when they designed this, um, when they came up with this idea for this movie, I'm sure it wasn't like, let's tell a love story. It was more
Yeah.
like, let's tell a screwball comedy that involves the fact that these two guys enjoy dating and having sex with women. You know, second, and consistent with Farce's anything goes atmosphere, screwball comedy spoofs the romantic process. Love comes across as hardly more significant than a board game. The dominating screwball heroine is often assisted by the fact that she only knows a courtship is occurring. Um, in a screwball comedy, male must suffer through the ritualistic humiliation at the hands of the zany heroine and or the plot itself. I mean, that's straight up, right? I just read
Yeah.
that out of the book. That is straight up what happens in this movie from the uh hardly more than a board game. I mean, the these guys were low key playing chess. And while
Yeah.
everybody else is playing checkers. And again with the male, this ritualistic humiliation of the fact that, especially during that time they had to dress up like women
Yeah.
and had to act like women, and that was completely different from these two kind of, I don't want to say alpha males, but
Yeah, but I mean, it's a time when gender roles were very clear cut, and men had a higher social status than women. So, um, having for their own survival to be, take a lesser status, if you will, and portray themselves as women just to survive. I mean, that that's textbook right there.
right. And so yeah, that this it's from a textbook and it is textbook. The third way in which a screwball and romantic comedy differ is in basic character development. Most obviously, the former genre is dripping with eccentrics, starting with the archetype zany heroine and the aforementioned complimentary crazy supporting cast. Romantic comedy often showcases a decidedly less controlling, more serious heroine. Consistent with this, supporting characters in the romantic genre also tend to be more funny than flaky. So going back to this film, eccentrics are definitely had.
Yes.
This movie definitely is eccentric, and the zany heroine. I would argue that Marilyn Monroe plays that zany heroine
Yeah.
and plays it quite well.
Yeah. She's perhaps the only honest character we feel in the whole movie, right?
Yeah,
Because with Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon's characters, they have this whole inner turmoil conflict, if you will, of they're both really falling in love with Marilyn Monroe's character, but they can't out themselves as like, hey, we're actually men, because then that blows their whole cover, right? Whereas she's genuinely like, I don't know, there's just something very honest about her. I don't know if it's the fact that we see, her confide in both our male leads at different points in the movie. But she seems just very, very genuine and like, this is who she is.
yeah, she does, and I think at first we think Daphne,
Mm.
Jerry's character, is gonna kind of put the moves on her, but
Yeah.
it ends up being Joe
Yeah.
that is the one that kind of scores because he's a saxophone player.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's incredibly honest in this movie, and to me that kind of comes off, not that honesty is means you're stupid, but I mean it's almost like she doesn't know better. And
But then
so
she comes
that's
off looking like the smartest one, because she tells what does she tell Tony Curtis's character in the boat when he reveals that who he really is, and she's like, I knew the whole time.
yeah, which look, if you didn't know the whole time, you probably would say you knew the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she also, and apparently she has a financial advisor.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I no, that when she said she knew the whole time, that's one of those when you actually don't know, but you want to cover yourself.
I don't
Uh,
know. She played it
you
off
know,
rather well, and I kind of bought it.
uh,
Maybe I bought it for the resolution.
but
That
perhaps
that could
because
be.
yeah,
Maybe
that
I
really
was
helps with
willing
the
to believe
resolution,
it.
obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in this movie you're kind of willing to believe
Yeah.
what happens. I think that there's definitely some verisimilitude in there where it's kind of easier to
A
believe.
lot. A lot.
Um, the fourth contrast between the two genre involves the dating ritual itself. In a screwball comedy, the eccentric heroine frequently finds herself in a triangle with the sought-after male and his life-smothering fiance. The heroine's mission is to free the male from the rigid woman. And that's not exactly what happens in this movie. But I guess I would say that the fiance or the kind of the issue, the third person in the triangle is the ruse itself.
Yeah.
Um, it's this constant back and forth of, he really wants to be with her, but also needs to stay a woman.
He really
And
wants to
so it's
live at the same time.
yeah. So that's that's
Yeah.
pulling the character back and forth. And so I would argue that is that kind of love
Mm-hmm.
triangle in a way. But it's not as obviously the other things we've mentioned so far, it's not as clear cut as some of these other things, but I would argue that there is definitely a love triangle of sorts. The idea, what happens in a love triangle, those kind of situations or those emotions definitely come up in this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
The final difference between the two genres is in plot pacing. Screwball comedy escalates near the close, as the title of one pioneering example of the title suggests. Theodora goes wild. And I think that is completely accurate in this case. The third act of this movie gets really crazy really fast.
Oh yeah.
And especially when Spats comes from
Mm-hmm.
Chicago to this convention. And
Yeah.
so, crap, now the mobsters are here. What are we
Yeah.
going to do? And so they kind of run around with their heads cut off, essentially, in this third act of the movie. And that definitely is different than a normal romantic comedy where it's a little
Yeah.
bit more of a slower burn.
Yeah.
But the pacing, and we mentioned in the beginning, the pacing of this movie, I think works to its benefit, but it's noticeable, not in a
Mm-hmm.
bad way, but it is noticeable
Yeah.
in the
It
movie.
doesn't get bogged down in the details too much,
Right.
right? It's I really feel like the first two acts of this movie are almost like winding up a top, you know? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
winding and winding and winding, and we're building all this, not tension, I want to say, but like building all this like background information, and we're building
Just
the
let it loose.
situation, and then we hit the third act, and literally it's just like you let it go, and it's just literally
Yeah.
bouncing all over this hotel until they get in the boat and leave.
Yeah. And it's like, I think it's interesting you say they don't get bogged down in the details, because I think that's one of the things that really um, almost makes it even more believable,
Yeah.
right? When they're not kind of talking about, oh, this, and this is why this, when it's kind of more like, we need you to just believe this and not harp on it too much and be too overbearing with some of
Yeah.
these details. I think it makes it easier to believe, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you. Like, I was sitting there believing this more than maybe another, if somebody else wrote this or directed it where it's more detail oriented. It's like when you're lying and you have a lot of details.
Yeah.
So the details, it's almost like if you have too many details, the person's lying.
Yeah.
In a way, but it also depends on the types of details. But anyway, yeah. So this movie is definitely a screwball comedy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that I'm glad to have been able to watch right after Return to Me to see the difference between romantic comedy and screwball comedy, because
Right.
those are two very different kind of subgenres, and it was cool to see that contrast this week. Now we've come to the part of the podcast where we do our rose, bud, and thorn. Jake, I'm going to let you take it away. What were your rose, bud, and thorn?
Okay. My rose is going to go to Jack Lemmon. He plays Jerry slash Daphne, and I think he is the funnier out of him and Tony Curtis. I think he's the funniest character. I think in the whole movie, his wit is just very quick. It's so quick. It's so sharp, and he really, um, it, his character can seem rather two dimensional at times. But I think like we've been talking about, like this is a movie that moves so fast that you can't get bogged down in the details. It
Mhm.
doesn't want you to get bogged down in the details, and so um, he takes this archetypal character and just plays it so well. His humor, it makes me laugh every time. I've seen this probably 10, 20 times and I laugh every time. My bud is going to be the editing. Okay. We've been talking about how fast this moves, and it does move fast as far as story progression. I think the editing is a little slow. Okay.
Okay.
We see a lot of fades, especially on the train. Like, I lost track of how many times like we fade out to a close up of the wheels on the train like chugging around, and then we fade back in. And yes, it's supposed to be showing a passage of time, but the it just
Yeah.
it that felt really slow to me. I think it's perhaps one of the more dated things in the movie is the editing. It makes it feel um what made when it was made, if not older than when it was made. And
Mm.
a lot of the shots are longer, right? It's longer takes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like when your story is moving so fast and it's all about quick, sharp jokes, contrasting that with a slow editing style um, detracts from the movie a little bit, right? And so that's my bud. And then I don't have a thorn because this movie is it's light, it's fun, it's zany. Um, if you don't like any of those things, you're really not going to like this movie.
Yeah.
But I think
Also,
um,
who are you as a person if you
I
don't like
know
any of those things?
someone who takes life way too seriously. So
Yeah.
this is definitely a movie that you can sit back and unwind to and just have a good laugh.
No, I agree with those. I like those. I think for me, I would agree that Jack Lemmon was just a freaking legend in this movie. Like
Mm-hmm.
I they gave him he definitely shines. Even
Yep.
though he at towards the end of the second act, more into the third act, he kind of takes a little bit of a backseat to Tony Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that his comedic timing was excellent. And I just loved his struggle with at the beginning of the movie with like, man, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm a woman, I'm a woman, I'm a woman, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. And then by the end, he's like, yeah, I'm marrying
Osgood.
Osgood. And like, you're like, bro, you have not wanted to be a woman this entire time.
I know.
Um, but when you get out on that dance floor, um, no, it was just I thought he really shined here. I
Well,
would also go ahead.
in a lot of ways, I think you can look at this purely from a story standpoint and make the argument that perhaps Tony Curtis's character is supposed to be the main character here, is supposed to
Hmm.
be our main hero because he's the one that does get the girl in the end. And you can feel like Jack Lemmon can be more of the sidekick, right? He's always the one that complains this wasn't his idea in the first place. He's complaining, and his antics are the one is what makes this movie funny. But he outshines Tony in a lot of ways. I think
I agree,
he steals their scenes together.
and I think you're absolutely right that Tony was probably supposed to be, the main protagonist in this film because a lot of times you see the side characters, put that in air quotes, are the funnier ones, right? Like for instance, Tow Mater in Cars,
Yeah,
right? He's obviously not Lightning McQueen, but he's really, really funny. And then in Cars 2, when they try and make him the star of the show, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So I think he has kind of that aspect to him. So I would completely agree that this is probably supposed to be Tony Curtis's movie, but man, does Jack Lemmon shine.
Yeah.
I was also going to say my other rose was I really did like Marilyn Monroe in this movie.
Of all of her
I
movies, this might be one of my favorites. I like it
yeah.
better than some of her other comedies. Um, it feels, like I said, it feels more genuine in a way, right? And it feels
Yeah.
like she's comfortable in not only her timing as a comedian, but her character's timing in the movie, right? She
Mhm.
understands what role her character is playing, and where the joke's supposed to land and how she plays into the joke.
Yeah, I mean, they're not asking her to do a lot of heavy lifting,
Mm-mm.
from a character perspective, and I think that is one of the reasons um, why she's so good in this. You know, for instance, Dave Bautista, right? He plays Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's not the best actor, especially in 2014 when he was cast or when
Yeah.
the movie came out. Um, not the best actor, but James Gunn wrote Drax in a way that played to his strengths. And I
Right.
think that this character that she plays of Sugar really plays to her strengths.
Mm.
Um, and it doesn't highlight the weaknesses of her acting ability. Or, I mean, she's not a bright person, and like her character's not a bright person. And she was obviously a smart businesswoman
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, but um, she's kind of ditzy. You know,
Yeah.
that to me, I think is something that she really shines playing this character.
And I think not only does she play to her strengths, it plays to who we expect Marilyn Monroe to be, right?
Yeah.
Not as the person, as this larger than life sex symbol, um, this ditzy blonde that really, we all know her kind of to be, that's her legacy, or her persona, even that if that wasn't who she was as a person. And that's definitely um that's definitely who audiences in 1959 would have expected her to be. So I think that's
Right.
probably another reason why she shines so well in this movie.
Right. I think for me, I don't really have a bud. I agree with you with the editing. For a bud, I think for my thorn, and I mentioned before, is the lip syncing. Marilyn Monroe's lip syncing.
Yeah.
It's just, one, it doesn't sound like her. Two, it's obvious that she's kind of doing it. You know, it didn't mesh well
Yeah.
in the edit. Um, that I really didn't care for that. But I mean, it wasn't the forefront of the movie, really.
Yeah.
That's not what the movie was about. So it's okay that she's not the best
Mm-hmm.
in that. Moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about who we think each other are in this film.
Yeah.
So why don't you go first, Jake? Who did you think I was?
I think you're Jerry slash Daphne, Jack
Yeah.
Lemmon's character.
Yeah.
Just because you're someone who has a very sharp wit. Um, and I think when I watched this, and when I picked it, I knew you would enjoy the comedy in this, because I think it's comedy that you use at times, if you will,
At times, all the time.
all the time. Yes, your silver tongue.
That's one of the nicer things that's been said about me, is that I have a silver tongue.
No, I,
Um,
I think from the wit alone, I think you're Jerry.
I I don't know why, but and you're not Osgood,
I knew it. I knew you were going to tell me I'm Osgood.
but I don't know. It's just like I don't know. I knew you'd love that character. like watching this, I'm like, he's gonna love this Oscar. So I just it kind of directs like
Yeah.
link. It's a direct link to you, and so I think that's kind of why I gravitate towards Osgood as the answer, because I don't really think that you're like a Tony Curtis character. You're smarter than Marilyn Monroe, and honestly, yeah, I am more of a Jack Lemmon kind of character. And of course, it would be my luck that I'm the one that doesn't get the girl. I did say there was
Aha.
there was one line, speaking of which, that Marilyn Monroe says that I wanted to highlight. It says, "Men who wear glasses are so much more gentle, sweet, and helpless." And I just think that's just poetry. Um, Absolutely true. Very encouraging. Just I mean,
What do you got in your face there, Ben?
what?
I wonder why that stuck out to you.
I have a hat.
It's on your head, not your face.
You're a face. Uh
Oh shoot.
but anyway, I think moving to closing comments, I really enjoyed this movie. I'm glad you picked it.
Yeah.
It's exciting that this is like every single movie we've picked this month has been just a little different.
Yeah, I felt
And
like we kind of really ran the gamut of romance films while at the same time just scratching the surface, right?
yeah,
It almost exists. I think we've looked at it as more of a theme than a genre, perhaps, because
right. I agree.
we've really just kind of run the gamut about romance movies. We've looked at rom-coms like When Harry Met Sally, Return to Me, but then we took a serious look at it with If Beale Street Could Talk, and taking a more realistic approach to it, and then the complete opposite end of the spectrum with a screwball comedy like Some Like It Hot.
Yeah, no, this is a movie I really enjoyed. And you're absolutely right. We really ran the gamut this month. Next month, Good Night Nurse. I'm just gonna do that. I'm just gonna do this.
Okay.
Just hold it. We got to keep it in because now I'm like at this weird angle. Anyway, so next week we're starting our series called Wick Weeks, and it's going to be on John Wick, which is again another emotional whiplash from a screwball comedy. But I wanted to do this because it's leading up to John Wick Chapter 4, which releases later next month. And so, Jake, I don't think you've seen John Wick before,
I've
have you?
seen none of the John Wick movies
Yes.
before,
Oh,
and so
buckle
this
up,
is
my friend.
this is going to be enlightening.
Yes,
Okay,
and I'm excited for you to see this.
because I know you love these movies a lot.
Oh yeah, I mean they're dope. They're dope. And Keanu Reeves is a king. I love Keanu Reeves, and he actually, and we'll talk about it. Gun Fu. He kind of spearheaded gun
Yeah.
fu. Like that's a real thing. So we're going to talk about all of that next week. But until then, let us know your thoughts. Do you have a review of Some Like It Hot? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What are your rosebud and thorn? We'd love to hear that from you. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with everything regarding the Cinephile. Make sure to follow Jake and myself on social media and follow the Cinephile on social media for more news and updates. This has been another episode of the Cinephile. We're really glad to have discussed 1959's Some Like It Hot. So without further ado, for Jake Biller, I'm Ben Sparrow. Thanks so much for watching. And cut.